Hi everyone, in this second lecture about historical ciphers, we are going to speak about Enigma. In fact, Enigma was a family of cipher machines that were built during and after World War II. Several of those machines were used by the German forces during the war. One of these machines is depicted in the picture on the right. The cryptanalysis of all these machines used by the German armies focused a huge effort on the part of the Allies. In particular, there was a whole center set up at Bletchley Park, which was scientifically led by Turing in order to break these machines. In this lecture, we are going to focus on the general architecture of Enigma and on the principles that were common to all the machines in this series. First, it's important to know that encryption was performed letter by letter. The operator typed the message one letter at a time and got an encrypted version also coming out one letter at a time. The input device was a keyboard and the output was either a kind of a printer or some board with little light attached to every letter. Because of the letter-by-letter nature of the cipher, and in order to prevent direct frequency analysis, the transformation evolved with time. So every time a letter was typed, the state of the machine was modified so that the next letter would be encrypted in a slightly different way. Moreover, the cipher was an involution. This means that if you reset the machine to the initial state and then type the obtained ciphertext as input, the new ciphertext, the new output, will be the original clear text. This property was an advantage because it made the cipher easy to use for the operators. It was also a disadvantage because the human manipulation could put the system at risk if performed in the wrong way. And in fact, this human manipulation led to many of the attacks that were discovered at Bletchley Park. The basic principles that we are going to look at in more details in the next slide is the following. The machine consists of a mix of electrical and mechanical technology, and every time a key is pressed, it creates an electrical circuit between the input and the output. More precisely, these circuits enter the machine from the keyboard, goes through several stages called the rotor, the reflector, and so on, and then comes back out of the machine through a similar path before coming out on the display panel. Because of the symmetry between the ingoing and outgoing paths, and also because of the symmetry of the piece that sits in the middle that is called the reflector, we are going to get the involution property of the cipher essentially for free. On top of this electrical basis, after each key is released, there is a mechanical evolution of the machine where the rotors are going to rotate in order to modify the circuit that is going to be used in the next step when the next letter is encrypted. In order to better understand the use of this machine, I encourage you to try one of the numerous simulators that are available on the internet. This is a schematic view of the machine where you can see the path from input letter to output letter. After the letter is typed, it first goes through something called the plug board, then goes through a set of 3 distinct rotors, then it goes to a reflector, goes back out through the 3 rotors, the plug board, and then it is displayed. Every rotor in the machine is an electrical circuit that permutes the letter from the input to the output. The reflector on the right is some kind of special rotor where both inputs and output are on the same side. As you can see on the picture, the reflector just pairs letters. This pairing of the letters is at the core of the involution property of the machine. Next to the keyboard, you can see the plug board, where pairs of letters are just exchanged according to some manual configuration of plugs. This manual configuration of the plug board, together with the choice and position of rotors and reflectors that are used for the day, form what is called the daily key. On top of that daily key, there is a pair message key, which is obtained by choosing the initial position of the rotors at the start of the encryption or decryption of the message. In the next slide, we are going to figure out the size of the key spaces for the Enigma machine, depending, of course, on the size of available rotor sets and this kind of things. You can see on this slide a computation of the equivalent key size of one of the strongest Enigma machines that was available at the time of World War II, namely the M4 Enigma machine. And you see that the key size was around 87 bits. This is smaller than the recommended key size today. Despite this, it would be a big challenge, even for a very big computer today, to do an exhaustive key search on such an Enigma machine. This shows that the cryptanalytic effort that was conducted at the time had to rely on the structural property of the Enigma encryption. Looking at these properties and understanding how they can be used to attack the system will be our goal in the rest of this lecture. Before going into cryptanalysis, we need to understand Enigma at a very fine level of detail. In order to do that, we are going to do a rewriting of Enigma into a modern form. More precisely, we are going to rewrite it into some computer program form and see how it can be implemented on a modern computer. The present slide gives a global view of the steps that occur during Enigma encryption. In the first step, the letter that has been typed goes through the plug board and is exchanged maybe with some other letter. Then it goes through every rotor, which corresponds to applying some permutation. After that, it goes to the reflector, which is an involutive permutation. Then it goes back through the rotor in the reverse direction. Finally, it is possibly exchanged again in the plug board before being displayed. After that, the rotors are rotated in order to move to the next machine state. In the following slides, we are going to detail all these steps. Starting in the middle of the machine, we first look at the reflector. It is an involutive permutation with no fixed points, which means that the letters are grouped by pairs and that every letter is exchanged with the other letter from the same pair. In the example of reflector A, we see that A is exchanged with E and N is exchanged with R. Then we find the rotors, which are also permutations. The first 8 in the list can be used in any of the 3 first rotor positions, while the rotors beta and gamma can only be used in position number 4. For the first 8 rotors, we also give information about the position of notches, which are going to be used later in the rotor rotation process. The basic transformation corresponding to a rotor is very easy to apply. It suffices to read the description of a rotor as an encrypted alphabet. This is depicted in the picture. Once a rotor has been rotated, the situation is slightly more complex. We show here what happens with the rotation of 2 letters. Before going to the rotor, the input letter is first shifted by 2 positions to the right. Then it goes through the rotor, and the output letter is shifted back 2 positions to the left. The outermost part of the encryption process is the plug board. Every wire plugged into it allows to exchange 2 letters in a pair. In the example, we have 3 wires which are plugged in, a blue, a green, and a red one. For example, the blue wire exchanges letters D and X, both at the input and at the output stage of the process. We now describe the evolution of the rotor after every key is released. First, there is a basic evolution rule that simply rotates the rightmost rotor by one position. Depending on the position of notches, additional rotation may be made. For example, if the notch of the first rotor is present in the right position, then the second rotor is also rotated. If the notch of the second rotor is in position, then both the second and third rotor are rotated. Note that the fourth rotor is never rotated. Now that we have fully described the Enigma encryption, we can start looking at its properties. We first remark that at every point in time, the current transformation is an involution with no fixed point. As we said before, this was used for decrypting Enigma ciphertext. Please take some time to review the proof of this property. If we follow modern definition of what cryptosecurity is, then the Enigma encryption is trivially broken. We give a few examples in this slide. The first attack is simply to encrypt the same letter, for example the letter A, many times, let's say 100 times. If this is an Enigma encryption, then the letter A will never appear in the ciphertext. By contrast, if this was a purely random string of the same length, then the letter A will appear with probability greater than 98%. This is a chosen plaintext distinguisher between Enigma and a purely random encryption process. The second attack is that the message is malleable letter by letter. If you just replace one letter in the encrypted text, then it changes this letter and this letter only in the plaintext. Finally, there is a very easy chosen plaintext attack that allows to decrypt anything. Just feed back the thing you want to decrypt in the encryption black box, and you will get the plaintext back. It is a trivial consequence of the way that ciphertexts were decrypted, but nevertheless, with modern standards, this completely breaks the system. In some sense, the previous attacks can be considered as not fair. So as an introduction to modern cryptanalytic techniques, we are going to now show a simple attack against Enigma that is much faster than exhaustive search. This attack is going to rely on the fact that the cipher has two parts. One that is fixed, that is basically the plug board, and one that is varying, which consists of the rotors. The relevant property here is that the key size corresponding to the varying part is much smaller than the total key size of the system, and this is what we are going to use in the following attack. The basic idea is that we can fingerprint the varying part with very little knowledge on the fixed part. The only thing we will require about F is the fact that this fixed part is a permutation, and we will ask to know what the image of some letter, let's say A by F, is. We will first collect some ciphertext data by encrypting a sequence consisting of many A's repeated. Let's L1, L2 up to Ln denote the encrypted sequence, and assume that A is mapped to X by the fixed permutation F. Now we can see that if two letters Li and Lj are equal, then Vi of X and Vi of J are also equal, and the converse is also true. If the sequence of letters is long enough, then this pattern of equality is enough to completely characterize the letter X and the varying sequence V. The cost of enumerating all possibilities for X and the varying sequence will be under 40 bits, which is very easy on a modern computer. In practice, we can build the fingerprint in the following way. We first assume that we have an encryption of 43 consecutive values of A. Then, to each of the last 12 letters, we associate a number. This number is the position of the first occurrence of the letter if it occurs in the first 31 position. Otherwise, we associate the number 0. The total length of this fingerprint is 60 bits. This is enough to identify almost uniquely the varying part and the encryption of the letter A under F. Once V has been recovered, we know the encrypted sequence before and after the application of F, so the recovery of F is also very easy. Note that during the data collection we have to take a little bit of care. As you can see on the slide, instead of collecting 43 letters, we collect 46 and discard the first 3. This is due to the fact that the initial position of the machine can be a special position that is unreachable after rotation. In order to get rid of this bad configuration, we simply discard the first 3 letters. Implementing this attack is not difficult on a modern computer, and it can fully break Enigma in something like 2 minutes on a single CPU.